There is a moment in every stable system when danger does not arrive with noise, but with silence. No alarms, no visible collapse, no dramatic failure. Just a subtle shift in patterns that most people never notice. Supply chains continue to move, markets continue to operate, infrastructure appears intact. Yet beneath this illusion of continuity, small irregularities begin to accumulate. A delayed shipment here, a minor power fluctuation there, a slight but consistent increase in response times across critical services. Individually, these signals are dismissed as routine inefficiencies. Collectively, they form the earliest measurable indicators that a system is under stress. The danger is not that these signals exist. The danger is that they are almost always ignored. From a systems engineering perspective, no complex network fails instantly without warning. Whether it is an electrical grid, a food distribution network, or an urban water system, collapse is preceded by a phase of degradation. This phase is characterized by reduced redundancy, increased load on remaining components, and a narrowing margin for error. Engineers refer to this as loss of resilience, the system's ability to absorb disturbances without transitioning into failure. What makes this phase dangerous is that performance metrics can remain within acceptable ranges while underlying stability is eroding. In other words, everything appears normal until the system crosses a threshold from which recovery is no longer possible without external intervention. The common misunderstanding is that crises are sudden events. In reality, most large-scale disruptions are the result of accumulated stress that goes unrecognized or unaddressed. People are conditioned to respond to visible threats, fires, floods, structural damage, but not to statistical anomalies or subtle inefficiencies. When delivery times increase by a few hours, it is attributed to traffic or logistics delays. When energy usage spikes slightly, it is blamed on weather variation. These explanations are not incorrect, but they are incomplete. They fail to account for systemic correlation, where multiple minor deviations occur simultaneously across independent sectors. This correlation is one of the most reliable indicators that a system is approaching its operational limits. Hidden within these patterns is a fundamental principle of complex systems: critical slowing down. As a system nears a tipping point, its ability to recover from disturbances becomes progressively weaker. Small disruptions take longer to resolve, and variability increases. This is not random noise. It is a measurable signal that the system's internal feedback mechanisms are losing efficiency. In ecological systems, this principle has been used to predict collapses in fisheries and forests. In financial systems, it appears as increased volatility before market downturns. In infrastructure, it manifests as repeated minor failures that require more time and resources to fix. The key insight is that recovery time, not failure itself, is the early warning. Historical evidence consistently reinforces this pattern. Before major blackouts, power grids often experience a series of minor faults that are quickly corrected but occur with increasing frequency. Before supply shortages, logistics networks show signs of strain through delays, rerouting, and inventory imbalances. Even in disaster response scenarios, communication breakdowns and coordination delays emerge before the situation escalates into full-scale crisis. These are not isolated incidents. They are precursors. Each one represents a small failure that the system manages to absorb, but at the cost of reducing its overall resilience. The survival implications of ignoring these signals are significant. When people assume that stability equals safety, they delay preparation until disruption becomes undeniable. By that point, options are limited. Resources become scarce, response times increase, and competition for essential goods intensifies. The window for effective action exists during the phase when the system is still functioning but showing signs of stress. Recognizing this window requires a shift in perception, from reacting to visible failure to interpreting subtle indicators of instability. As these signals accumulate, the system enters a more volatile state. Interdependencies begin to amplify risk, where a failure in one sector triggers cascading effects in others. A delay in transportation affects food availability, which in turn impacts public behavior, placing additional strain on services and infrastructure. This is the point where the illusion of normalcy becomes most dangerous, because it masks the speed at which conditions can deteriorate. The transition from stability to crisis is not gradual at this stage. It is rapid and often irreversible without significant intervention. Understanding these dynamics is not about predicting a specific event, but about recognizing patterns that precede all system failures. The absence of visible crisis does not indicate safety. It often indicates that the system is still in the phase where warning signs are present but overlooked. And it is precisely in this phase that the most critical decisions are either made or ignored. As this phase deepens, the system begins to exhibit a more dangerous characteristic: synchronization of failure. What were once isolated inefficiencies start aligning in time and impact, creating compounded stress across multiple layers of operation. In infrastructure networks, this might appear as simultaneous strain on energy, transportation, and communication systems. In supply chains, it emerges as overlapping delays that disrupt not just delivery schedules but inventory planning and production cycles. The danger here is not merely that systems are under pressure, but that their failures are no longer independent. When disruptions synchronize, the capacity to isolate and contain problems disappears, and the entire network becomes vulnerable to cascading breakdowns. The analytical mistake most observers make at this stage is focusing on individual failures rather than systemic interaction. A delayed shipment is treated as a logistics issue. A localized outage is seen as a technical fault. A staffing shortage is attributed to human factors. Each of these explanations is valid in isolation, but they obscure the larger pattern of convergence. Complex systems are not defined by their components alone, but by the relationships between those components. When stress affects multiple nodes simultaneously, it alters the behavior of the entire system. This is why early-stage crises are so difficult to recognize. They do not present as a single, identifiable problem, but as a pattern of small disruptions that reinforce each other. At the core of this phenomenon is a concept from network theory known as interdependence density. As systems become more efficient, they also become more tightly coupled, meaning that the output of one component becomes the input of another with minimal buffering or delay. This optimization increases performance under normal conditions, but it reduces tolerance for disruption. There is less slack in the system, fewer redundancies, and limited capacity to absorb shocks. When one node fails or slows down, the effect propagates almost immediately, creating a chain reaction that can escalate far beyond the original disturbance. This is not a flaw in design, but a trade-off inherent in highly optimized systems. Empirical data from past disruptions reveals how quickly these cascades can develop. In major infrastructure failures, post-event analysis often shows that the initial trigger was relatively minor. A single overloaded line, a delayed decision, a localized resource shortage. What transformed these minor issues into large-scale crises was the lack of buffering between interconnected systems. Once the disturbance entered the network, it encountered no resistance, only pathways for amplification. Each subsequent failure increased the load on remaining components, accelerating the progression toward collapse. By the time the situation was recognized as critical, the system had already passed the point where simple interventions could restore stability. The implications for survival are not abstract. In tightly coupled environments, response windows shrink dramatically. Actions that would be effective during early warning phases become insufficient once cascading effects begin. For individuals and communities, this means that preparation cannot rely on reacting to obvious signals. It must be based on understanding how systems behave under stress and identifying when those behaviors begin to change. Waiting for clear confirmation of crisis is equivalent to waiting until the system's internal safeguards have already failed. As stress continues to accumulate, another less visible but equally critical factor emerges: resource prioritization under constraint. When systems operate near capacity, they begin to allocate resources more selectively. This process is often invisible to the public, but it has measurable effects. Maintenance schedules are extended, backup systems are reserved rather than deployed, and non-essential services experience gradual degradation. These adjustments are designed to preserve core functionality, but they also reduce overall system flexibility. What remains is a structure that can maintain appearance of normal operation while losing its ability to adapt to unexpected shocks. The misunderstanding at this stage is interpreting maintained functionality as resilience. In reality, it often indicates the opposite. A system that appears stable while quietly shedding capacity is becoming more fragile, not less. The hidden science here lies in load balancing under constraint. As available resources decrease, the system redistributes load across fewer components, increasing the stress on each one. This creates a feedback loop where higher stress leads to greater risk of failure, which in turn increases stress on the remaining components. The process is gradual, but its trajectory is predictable. Evidence of this pattern can be found in sectors ranging from healthcare to energy. Hospitals operating near capacity may continue to function, but with reduced surge capability and increased vulnerability to sudden influxes. Power grids may deliver consistent output, but with diminished reserves to handle spikes in demand or unexpected outages. These conditions are not immediately visible, yet they define the system's true state of readiness. When an additional disturbance occurs, even a small one, the lack of reserve capacity transforms it into a critical event. This is where escalation accelerates. The system, already strained and tightly coupled, encounters a disturbance it can no longer absorb. Recovery times lengthen further, synchronization of failures intensifies, and resource constraints limit response options. What follows is not a gradual decline, but a rapid transition from controlled stress to uncontrolled disruption. The tipping point is often recognized only in hindsight, because it is defined not by a single event, but by the cumulative effect of many overlooked signals. The transition into this phase is subtle but decisive. It marks the boundary between a system that can still recover and one that is entering irreversible degradation without significant external support. Understanding where this boundary lies requires attention to patterns that are easy to dismiss but critical to interpret. And as the system moves closer to that boundary, the signals do not become louder, they become more frequent, more aligned, and more consequential. At this stage, the system no longer fails in parts, it fails in behavior. Processes that once operated predictably begin to show irregular outputs, even when inputs remain unchanged. This is a hallmark of nonlinear instability, where small disturbances produce disproportionately large effects. Observers often misread this as randomness, but it is structured volatility driven by weakened internal controls. Evidence appears in sudden service fluctuations, unpredictable shortages, and inconsistent recovery patterns. For survival, this phase is critical. It signals that adaptation time has nearly expired, and any delay in response shifts outcomes from manageable disruption to irreversible breakdown across interconnected systems.